It was one of those evenings that people in the city waited for all year. A night of music, class, and elegance. The famous Vienna Royal Concert Hall was shining bright with golden lights. Cars stopped one after another at the entrance, letting out guests in their finest clothes. The red carpet led up to tall wooden doors, and inside, the chandeliers sparkled like tiny stars. Everyone had come to see one man, Leonard Albrecht, a world-famous pianist known not only for his talent, but also for his pride. To him, every stage was his kingdom. He had spent years building his reputation, and tonight the hall was packed with fans who adored him. People whispered about how perfectly he played, how his hands seemed to dance over the keys, and how no one could match his skill. The concert began. Leonard walked to the stage wearing a confident smile, bowing slightly as the audience clapped and cheered. He adjusted the piano bench, took a deep breath, and then began to play. The music filled the hall, rising and falling like waves. Every note was sharp, controlled, and precise, exactly as people expected from a man like him. In one of the back rows sat a woman named Maria Novak. She didn't belong to the world of shining chandeliers and fancy clothes. Her dress was simple, her shoes old, but her eyes were full of wonder. She worked as a housekeeper in a small guest house just outside the city. Her niece, who loved music, had saved money to buy her this ticket. It was Maria's first time attending a concert this grand. As Leonard played, Maria listened with her whole heart. She wasn't a musician, at least not in the eyes of the world, but she understood music in a different way. She had grown up in a small village where the church had an old, broken piano. When she was young, she would sneak into the church after cleaning and press the keys softly, teaching herself little melodies by ear. No one taught her the notes. No one ever told her she was good. But music had always been her secret friend, the one thing that made her feel alive. Now, as she sat in the audience watching this famous man perform, she felt something mix inside her: admiration and sadness. She admired his talent, but she also remembered the old church piano that had long been sold to pay for repairs. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Still, as she listened, her fingers moved slightly in her lap, as if remembering what it once felt like to play. The crowd roared with applause as Leonard finished his final piece. He stood, gave a proud bow, and smiled at the standing ovation. Cameras flashed. But behind that smile, there was a touch of arrogance, the kind that comes from knowing you are the best. After the main performance, there was a short break before the audience interaction part, a tradition at Leonard's concerts. He liked to bring someone from the crowd to the stage for fun, often teasing them with light jokes. The audience found it entertaining, and Leonard enjoyed showing how no one else could play like him. When he asked if anyone wanted to try the piano, a few people laughed. Some raised their hands jokingly. Maria's niece, sitting beside her, nudged her playfully and whispered, "Go on out, Maria. You always say you miss playing." Maria laughed nervously. "Oh, no. That's not for me." But her niece lifted her hand high before Maria could stop her. Leonard noticed. "Ah, we have a volunteer," he said, his voice filled with playful charm. The spotlight turned toward Maria. The crowd clapped lightly, some giggling. Maria felt her cheeks turn red. She wanted to hide, but somehow her feet began to move. The people around her cheered as she walked slowly toward the stage. Leonard smiled as she approached. "Welcome, madam," he said with a small laugh. "So you play the piano?" Maria shook her head shyly. "Not really. Just a little." Leonard raised an eyebrow and stepped aside, motioning toward the grand piano. "Then by all means, show us what you can do." The audience laughed softly. Maria sat down on the bench, her heart pounding. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For a moment, she froze. The stage lights were too bright and hundreds of eyes were on her. Leonard crossed his arms and waited, clearly expecting a small joke, maybe a few clumsy notes before everyone moved on. But Maria closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She wasn't thinking about the crowd anymore. In her mind, she wasn't in the royal hall. She was back in her little church years ago, playing softly for no one but herself. And as her fingers touched the keys, the room fell silent. Maria's fingers rested on the smooth black and white keys. For a few seconds she didn't move. The lights above the stage felt hot against her skin, and she could hear her heart beating in her ears. All around her the crowd waited, whispering softly. Some people smiled kindly, others smirked, expecting a small laugh or a few clumsy notes. Leonard stood beside the piano, his arms folded, half amused, half curious. He had done this many times before, inviting random people from the audience to play for fun. Usually it ended with laughter and applause. But this time, something about the woman sitting before him felt different. She wasn't nervous in the usual way. She wasn't giggling or pretending to act brave. She simply sat there still and calm, as if searching for something deep inside. Maria finally pressed a key, a single soft note. The sound echoed through the quiet hall. She pressed another and then another, her hands trembling slightly. The notes didn't sound perfect, not at first, but they carried something that no one expected: emotion. As she began to play, the whispers in the audience slowly faded away. People leaned forward, watching her fingers glide over the piano. The melody that formed was simple but filled with feeling. A tune that spoke of loneliness, of dreams left behind, and of hope that still lived quietly in a corner of the heart. Leonard's smirk faded. He straightened, his eyes fixed on her hands. The woman who moments ago looked out of place now seemed completely at home. Each note she played felt like a story, soft, fragile, and honest. Maria wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. In her mind, she was far away, back in her small village church where she used to play in the evenings after everyone left. She could almost smell the candles, hear the old wooden door creak, and feel the cold keys under her fingers. Those were lonely nights, but music had always been her friend. She remembered how, as a child, she would sneak into the church when no one was around. The piano was old, with chipped paint and missing keys, but it was enough. She would close her eyes and try to copy songs she heard from the radio, sometimes making up her own little tunes. The sound filled the empty room and made her feel less alone. Now here she was, sitting at one of the most beautiful pianos in the world, in front of hundreds of people. She didn't know how it happened. Maybe it was destiny. Maybe it was just a strange accident. But as she played, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. The melody grew stronger. Her hands no longer trembled. The notes flowed like water, smooth and pure. The audience sat frozen, listening in silence. Some people had tears in their eyes, though they couldn't explain why. The tune was simple, but it touched something deep inside them, something real. Leonard took a small step forward. He could hear a depth in her playing that even he, with all his years of training, couldn't always reach. It wasn't about technique or speed. It was about feeling. Every note seemed to come from her heart, not her hands. When Maria finally stopped, the last note lingered in the air. For a moment, no one moved. The hall was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the lights above. Maria kept her eyes closed, afraid to look up. She thought maybe they would laugh again. Maybe they would clap politely and move on. But then something unexpected happened. A single person began to clap. Softly at first, then louder. Soon the whole hall erupted into applause. People stood from their seats, cheering, whistling, shouting, "Bravo!" The sound filled the room like thunder. Maria opened her eyes, stunned. She looked around in disbelief. People were smiling at her, clapping with genuine admiration. Leonard, the proud pianist, stood beside her, speechless. His eyes, which usually sparkled with pride, now looked softer, almost humbled. He leaned down slightly and said quietly, "That was beautiful." Maria didn't know what to say. Her hand still rested on the piano, trembling again, but this time not from fear, from emotion. She smiled shyly, gave a small nod, and stood up slowly. The applause continued. Some people even wiped their tears. They hadn't just heard music, they had felt something real, something pure. As Maria walked back to her seat, people reached out to touch her hand or whisper words of praise. Her niece hugged her tightly, eyes shining. "Aunt Maria," she whispered, "you were amazing." Maria smiled through her tears. "I just played what I felt," she said softly. And for the first time in her life, she realized that sometimes the most powerful music doesn't come from fame or practice. It comes from the heart of someone who has lived, loved and lost, yet still finds a way to keep singing through the keys. The applause still echoed in the grand hall as Maria slowly made her way back to her seat. People were still talking about her performance, whispering things like, "Who is she? And how could she play like that?" The same audience that had laughed moments ago now looked at her with admiration and warmth. Some even stood up again to clap as she passed by. Maria felt her legs shaking as she sat down. Her niece grabbed her hand tightly, eyes wide with pride. You did it, Aunt Maria. You made everyone listen. Maria smiled faintly but didn't say much. Her heart was still racing. She couldn't believe what had just happened. It all felt like a dream, one of those rare moments in life that didn't seem real until long after they were over. On stage, Leonard remained standing beside the piano. His expression had completely changed. The smirk he wore earlier was gone. Now he looked thoughtful, even a little lost. For years he had performed in front of thousands, praised as one of the best pianists in the world. But tonight, a humble woman had touched hearts more deeply than all his technical perfection ever had. He looked toward the crowd, still buzzing with excitement, and then back at the piano where she had sat. Slowly he turned to the microphone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes music doesn't come from study or fame, it comes from the soul." His voice was softer than usual, almost emotional. Tonight we witnessed something rare, something pure. The audience clapped again, this time not for him, but for the woman who reminded them what music truly meant. Back in her seat, Maria lowered her head, embarrassed by the attention. She never wanted to show off. She hadn't played to impress anyone. She had only played because something inside her told her to, because the music had never really left her heart. When the event ended, people gathered around her. Strangers came to shake her hand and tell her how much her music had moved them. One elderly man said, "I've been coming to concerts for 40 years and I've never felt something like that." Another woman told her, "You made me cry." "Thank you for that." Maria didn't know how to respond. She just smiled shyly and said thank you. Deep inside, she was still that same village woman who cleaned rooms for a living. She didn't feel special. She didn't see herself as talented or important. She only knew that the piano spoke for her when words couldn't. As the crowd began to leave, Leonard walked toward her. The hall had grown quieter now, with only a few people lingering. When she saw him coming, she stood quickly, unsure of what to do. "Sir, I'm sorry," she said softly, almost out of habit. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." He looked at her with surprise. "A scene?" he repeated. "You gave us the best moment of the night." Maria lowered her eyes. "I just played what I remembered." Leonard smiled slightly, though his face still showed a trace of humility, something rare for him. "That's exactly what made it beautiful," he said. "You didn't play to prove anything. You played because you felt something. That's real art." For the first time, Maria noticed a gentleness in his voice. He wasn't talking like a proud performer now. He was talking like someone who had just learned a lesson. He took a small pause before asking, "Have you ever learned music formally?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I only played in my village church. It was old and broken, but I loved it." Leonard looked thoughtful again. "You have something special," he said finally. "I've met thousands of musicians, but very few can touch people the way you did tonight." Maria smiled shyly, unsure what to say. She wasn't used to praise, especially from someone famous. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "Promise me you'll never stop playing." Her eyes filled with tears. "I stopped years ago. I didn't think I ever would again." Leonard looked at her kindly. "Then maybe tonight was meant to remind you," he said. The words stayed with her long after she left the concert hall. As she walked outside into the cool night air, the city lights shimmered across the street. The sound of distant traffic mixed with the soft echo of the piano still ringing in her mind. Her niece held her arm and smiled. "Aunt Maria," she said gently, "you were born for this." Maria looked up at the sky, quiet for a moment. "Maybe," she said softly, "or maybe I was just lucky tonight." But deep inside, she felt something awaken, something she thought she had lost long ago. That night, as they rode home on the quiet bus through the glowing streets, Maria gazed out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. For the first time in many years, she didn't just feel like a worker or a forgotten dreamer. She felt alive again, reminded that talent, no matter how hidden, never truly disappears. It just waits for the right moment to be heard. The night after the concert, Maria couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still see the bright lights of the hall, the shining piano keys, and the faces of hundreds of people watching her play. The sound of their applause kept echoing in her ears. It all felt like a dream that she didn't want to end. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small room. The walls were plain, the furniture old, but her heart felt new. For years, she had lived a simple life. Waking up early, cleaning rooms, doing laundry, cooking for others, and going to bed tired but grateful. Music had always been something she left behind, like an old memory that belonged to another time. But tonight it had come back to her, stronger and clearer than ever. Her niece slept peacefully in the next room, her face still glowing from excitement. She had told everyone in the bus how her aunt had played in front of a world-famous pianist. People had smiled, congratulated them, and even asked Maria if she would perform again. The idea made Maria blush. "I'm no performer," she had said. But inside, she wasn't so sure anymore. The next morning, as she poured herself a cup of tea, she found herself tapping the table rhythmically, as if playing an invisible piano. She smiled to herself. Maybe Leonard was right. Maybe she should never stop playing. But then reality returned. She had to work. Bills had to be paid. Groceries had to be bought. The world didn't stop just because of one magical night. Still, something inside her had changed. The spark she thought was gone forever had quietly lit up again. At work, her coworkers gathered around her, eager to hear the story. "We saw you on social media," one of them said. "People are talking about that woman who played at Leonard's concert." Maria froze. "Me?" she asked, shocked. Her friend nodded eagerly. "Yes. Someone in the audience recorded you and posted the video online. It's everywhere now. People are calling you the mystery pianist." Maria's heart raced. She couldn't believe it. She had never even been on the internet much, let alone gone viral. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When she got home that evening, her niece was already on her phone, smiling widely. "Aunt Maria, look," she said, showing her the video. There she was, sitting nervously at the grand piano, then slowly finding her rhythm, playing the tune that had come straight from her heart. The comments were filled with love. "This is what real music feels like. I cried watching this. She plays from the soul. She's better than many professionals." Maria covered her mouth in disbelief. "Oh dear, I didn't know anyone was recording." Her niece laughed softly. "The world was meant to see it, Aunt Maria. Maybe this is your time." Maria didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to being noticed. For so long she had lived quietly, blending into the background. But now, strangers from around the world were talking about her. A woman who had never studied music, never performed on stage, yet managed to move hearts with a few simple notes. That night, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Is this Maria Novak?" The voice was polite and calm. "This is Leonard Albrecht." Maria almost dropped the phone. "Oh, yes, sir. I didn't expect—" Leonard chuckled lightly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to say thank you again for what you did that night." "Thank me?" Maria said in disbelief. "You're the famous one, sir." "I should thank you." Leonard's tone grew gentle. "No, Maria. You reminded me what music truly means. You see, sometimes fame and practice make us forget the heart behind the art. You brought that back to me." Maria was silent for a moment. She didn't know what to say. He continued, "I was wondering, would you consider meeting me again? I have an idea, something that might surprise you." Maria's heart raced again. "I'm not sure, sir. I'm not used to all this." Leonard smiled softly through the phone. "Just think about it. No pressure. You have something special and the world deserves to hear it." After the call ended, Maria sat quietly, holding her phone in her lap. Her tea had gone cold, but she didn't care. Her mind was spinning. What could he possibly want from her? She wasn't a professional. She didn't even own a piano anymore. And yet fate had placed her in a moment that was changing everything. She looked out the window at the quiet night sky and whispered to herself, maybe it's never too late. Deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of something unexpected, something that might lead her back to the music she had once loved and lost. The next few days felt unreal for Maria. Her phone didn't stop buzzing. People she had never met were sending messages filled with praise and kindness. Some called her the woman who played from the heart. News channels started mentioning her story. Reporters even came by the small guest house where she worked, asking for interviews. Maria, who was always shy and quiet, found it hard to understand what was happening. She was used to waking up early, cleaning rooms, washing sheets, and ending her day tired but peaceful. But now her world had changed. People recognized her in the street. Some smiled and said hello. Others stopped to shake her hand. It was overwhelming. One evening, as she was sitting near the window with a cup of tea, her niece walked in holding a small envelope. "Aunt Maria, this came for you," she said with excitement. Maria opened it carefully. Inside was a letter written on beautiful paper. It was from Leonard. He thanked her again for the unforgettable moment at the concert. Then, at the end, there was a personal note. "Maria, I am hosting a private charity concert next week. I would be honored if you would join me on stage. You don't need to prepare anything special. Just bring your heart, that's enough." Maria froze. Her hands shook as she read the letter again. A concert with him? The thought terrified her. She hadn't even planned to play again. That night at the hall had been a miracle, a once-in-a-lifetime thing. She wasn't sure she could do it again. Her niece saw the worry on her face. "Aunt Maria, you have to go," she said softly. "You touched so many people. You can't stop now." Maria smiled weakly. "I'm not a real musician, my dear." "I don't even own a piano," her niece thought for a moment. "Maybe you don't need one to start. You just need to believe that you can." The next day, Maria decided to visit the old church in her village, the same place where she had first learned to play. The building was quiet and dusty now. The piano was still there, but older, the wood cracked and the paint fading. She ran her fingers over the keys gently. They were out of tune, but the feeling was the same. She sat down and began to play softly. The sound wasn't perfect, but it brought back memories, long nights, quiet prayers, and that small spark of joy she used to feel every time she touched the piano. As she played, she thought about Leonard's words, "Bring your heart." Maybe that was all she needed to do. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be honest. Over the next few days, she practiced whenever she could. Her hands were slower than before, and sometimes she missed the notes, but her spirit was strong. Every time she played, she felt more like herself. Not the tired worker, not the quiet woman in the back row, but someone alive with purpose again. When the day of the charity concert finally came, Maria felt nervous. She wore a simple dress, the same one from the first night. Her niece held her hand as they arrived at the venue. This time, the crowd wasn't laughing. They were waiting for her with anticipation. Leonard greeted her warmly. "I'm so glad you came," he said with a smile. "You have no idea how much people are looking forward to hearing you again." Maria smiled shyly. "I'm not sure I can play like before." He looked at her kindly. "Don't try to play like before. Just play like you, that's what people love." When her turn came, Maria took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights weren't as bright this time, and the crowd felt friendlier. She sat down at the piano, closed her eyes, and began to play. The melody she chose was different from the first one. It was softer, more peaceful, like a story of healing and gratitude. Every note carried warmth. The audience sat in silence, completely absorbed. Some closed their eyes. Others smiled quietly. As she played, Maria felt the same connection she once had as a young girl in the church. The feeling that music wasn't just sound, but emotion given life. When she finished, there was that same beautiful pause, the quiet moment when hearts were still catching up with what they felt. Then came the applause. It was softer at first, then stronger, then thunderous. People stood, cheering and clapping with joy. Leonard came to the stage and took her hand, bowing with her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, smiling, "this is what true music sounds like." Maria felt tears in her eyes. She looked around the room, full of people she didn't know, yet somehow she felt close to all of them. That night she realized something simple but powerful. It didn't matter if she was rich or famous. What mattered was that she had shared something real. Her heart had spoken through her hands, and the world had listened. As she walked off the stage, Leonard whispered to her, "You see, Maria, sometimes the most beautiful performances come from the most humble souls." She smiled softly. "I just played what I felt," she said again, and everyone who heard her believed it. The night of the charity concert became a turning point in Maria's life. When she returned home, she wasn't just tired, she was full of quiet joy. Her heart felt light in a way it hadn't for years. She had stepped on stage again, faced her fears, and shared something beautiful with the world. For the first time, she realized that her music didn't just belong to her. It belonged to everyone who felt something while listening. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing again. Her niece ran into the room, waving the phone excitedly. "Aunt Maria, look. You're everywhere again. People loved last night's concert even more than the first one. Maria blinked in disbelief. Everywhere? She asked softly. Her niece nodded. Yes. They're calling you the Heart Pianist. Reporters, radio shows, even magazines are talking about you. They say your music heals people. Maria didn't know how to react. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. For most of her life, people had looked right past her. But now the world seemed to be turning its eyes toward her. It was strange and beautiful at the same time. Later that day, Leonard called again. His voice carried warmth and pride. Maria, last night was magical, he said. I've performed in the biggest halls across the world, but I've never seen people so moved. You have a gift that can't be taught. Maria smiled, her voice trembling a little. I only play what I feel, sir. That's exactly why people love you, he said kindly. You play with honesty. You remind everyone what real music is. He paused for a moment, then added, I want to make you an offer. How would you feel about performing with me again? Not just for one night, but for a whole tour. We could visit different cities and play together. It would inspire so many people. Maria froze. A tour? Traveling to new cities, performing for large crowds, and it sounded unbelievable. I don't know if I can do that, she said nervously. I'm not a professional like you. I'm just what? Leonard interrupted gently. A woman with a gift? A person who touches hearts with her music? That's more than enough, Maria. His words made her silent. She looked out the window, thinking about her small life. The old church, the guest house, the simple days that had once felt enough. And yet deep down she knew something had changed. The world had given her a new chance, one she never expected. A few days later, Maria agreed. All right, she said softly over the phone. I'll try. Leonard's smile could be heard in his voice. That's all I ask. When the tour began, Maria felt nervous all over again. But each performance taught her something new. Not about music, but about herself. She learned that age didn't matter, that dreams didn't expire, and that sometimes the greatest moments in life come long after we think our time has passed. People from all walks of life came to see her play. Young students, elderly couples, even children. Some brought flowers, others brought letters. Many said her music gave them peace, hope, or strength. Maria never knew what to say except, thank you. Leonard often watched her quietly during rehearsals. One day he said, Do you know, Maria, that night when I first invited you to the stage, it was meant as a joke? She smiled gently. Yes, I remember, he sighed softly. It was foolish of me. I thought I'd make people laugh. But instead you taught me humility. You reminded me that music doesn't belong to fame or technique. It belongs to the heart. Maria smiled again, her eyes kind. We all learn in our own ways, she said simply. As weeks passed, Maria began to feel more confident. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing something real, her story, her feelings, her truth. Every time her fingers touched the piano, the audience could feel her sincerity. At one performance, after she finished playing, a young girl came up to her with tears in her eyes. I want to play like you one day, she said softly. Maria knelt down and smiled. Then never stop believing in yourself, she said. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to feel the music. That simple advice spread like magic. People began to see Maria not only as a performer, but as an inspiration. Proof that dreams can awaken at any age. That life can surprise you when you least expect it. By the time the tour ended, Maria had played in places she had never dreamed of visiting. Each city left her with new memories and new faces who thanked her for touching their hearts. When she returned home, she didn't feel like a different person. She just felt more like herself than ever before. The same woman who once played alone in a quiet church had now shared her music with the world. And somewhere deep inside, she knew. This was the life her heart had been waiting for all along. The night of the charity concert became a turning point in Maria's life. When she returned home, she wasn't just tired. She was full of quiet joy. Her heart felt light in a way it hadn't for years. She had stepped on stage again, faced her fears, and shared something beautiful with the world. For the first time, she realized that her music didn't just belong to her. It belonged to everyone who felt something while listening. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing again. Her niece ran into the room, waving the phone excitedly. Aunt Maria, look, you're everywhere again. People loved last night's concert even more than the first one. Maria blinked in disbelief. Everywhere? She asked softly. Her niece nodded. Yes, they're calling you the Heart Pianist. Reporters, radio shows, even magazines are talking about you. They say your music heals people. Maria didn't know how to react. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. For most of her life, people had looked right past her. But now the world seemed to be turning its eyes toward her. It was strange and beautiful at the same time. Later that day, Leonard called again. His voice carried warmth and pride. Maria, last night was magical, he said. I've performed in the biggest halls across the world, but I've never seen people so moved. You have a gift that can't be taught. Maria smiled, her voice trembling a little. I only play what I feel, sir. That's exactly why people love you, he said kindly. You play with honesty. You remind everyone what real music is. He paused for a moment, then added, I want to make you an offer. How would you feel about performing with me again, not just for one night, but for a whole tour? We could visit different cities and play together. It would inspire so many people. Maria froze. A tour? Traveling to new cities, performing for large crowds, and it sounded unbelievable. I don't know if I can do that, she said nervously. I'm not a professional like you. I'm just... Just what? Leonard interrupted gently. A woman with a gift? A person who touches hearts with her music? That's more than enough, Maria. His words made her silent. She looked out the window, thinking about her small life. The old church, the guest house, the simple days that had once felt enough. And yet deep down she knew something had changed. The world had given her a new chance, one she never expected. A few days later, Maria agreed. All right, she said softly over the phone. I'll try. Leonard's smile could be heard in his voice. That's all I ask. When the tour began, Maria felt nervous all over again, but each performance taught her something new. Not about music, but about herself. She learned that age didn't matter, that dreams didn't expire, and that, sometimes, the greatest moments in life come long after we think our time has passed. People from all walks of life came to see her play, young students, elderly couples, even children. Some brought flowers, others brought letters. Many said her music gave them peace, hope, or strength. Maria never knew what to say except, thank you. Leonard often watched her quietly during rehearsals. One day he said, Do you know, Maria, that night when I first invited you to the stage, it was meant as a joke? She smiled gently. Yes, I remember. He sighed softly. It was foolish of me. I thought I'd make people laugh, but instead you taught me humility. You reminded me that music doesn't belong to fame or technique. It belongs to the heart. Maria smiled again, her eyes kind. We all learn in our own ways, she said simply. As weeks passed, Maria began to feel more confident. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing something real, her story, her feelings, her truth. Every time her fingers touched the piano, the audience could feel her sincerity. At one performance, after she finished playing, a young girl came up to her with tears in her eyes. I want to play like you one day, she said softly. Maria knelt down and smiled. Then never stop believing in yourself, she said. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to feel the music. That simple advice spread like magic. People began to see Maria not only as a performer but as an inspiration, proof that dreams can awaken at any age, that life can surprise you when you least expect it. By the time the tour ended, Maria had played in places she had never dreamed of visiting. Each city left her with new memories and new faces who thanked her for touching their hearts. When she returned home, she didn't feel like a different person. She just felt more like herself than ever before. The same woman who once played alone in a quiet church had now shared her music with the world, and somewhere deep inside she knew this was the life her heart had been waiting for all along.